Welcome to yet another Q&A from Tinnitus Quest. This time you get to meet the whole executive board of Tinnitus Quest and a few other people who are also involved. The idea is to talk a bit more about like organizational questions, like how do we get funding? How will we spend the funding? How will we report on progress to you guys? How will patients be involved? Like all of these kinds of things. But of course, we understand you guys are also always very interested in the research side of things, and you might have research-oriented questions, so maybe we will get to a few of those, as well. Um, I will start actually by presenting just a few slides. Don't worry, this is not a long presentation, but not all of you might be, familiar very familiar yet with what we do. We're a very young organization, right? And so I just wanted to give you the very general layout of our mission, our plans, where we are now, and then from there, I'll ask the others to give some introductory remarks, and then we will open it up for questions. Um, so Tinnitus Quest, we like to say that we are trying to instigate a quiet revolution. We really want to kind of shake up tinnitus research, and we feel that people suffering from tinnitus have traditionally been way too much ignored. So we're really trying to change that. Um, but why did we feel the need to start a new organization? Well, we know tinnitus is a very serious problem for 1 to 2% of the population. I can hear you think there's a lot more people who have tinnitus. Yes, that's true. You hear figures of 10%, 20%, 30%. But the 1 to 2%, we know that those are people who are really suffering severely. And those are the people for whom it's very important that we develop better treatments because the existing therapies, a lot of it is behavioral therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy. Those are just not sufficient. We need better treatments that can actually silence the tinnitus. We always talk about silencing tinnitus rather than curing. Of course, it should be the same thing, but sometimes a cure, people have different connotations with it. To some people, a cure can also mean that you've learned to live with your tinnitus. But we really mean actually removing the tinnitus signal itself, or at least severely reducing the noise level of the tinnitus. So there's not enough exploratory research happening. So really research looking into potential new and innovative angles to silence tinnitus. There's also a lot of barriers between the patient community, the research community, the general public. Like patients often have no idea what's going on in research, and there's just not enough communication between these. In the general public awareness, as you might well know, if you ever have tried to speak about your tinnitus with others, there's a huge lack of awareness. And there's just a lack of communication on the research that is going on. Tinnitus research is hugely underfunded. Um, so it's a much smaller field than, pain or depression or diabetes, many other fields that literally have 100 or 200 times more funding. But there is research going on, and there's just not enough communication about it. So for all of these reasons, we started Tinnitus Quest. And as I said, our vision really is to silence tinnitus. So how do we plan to accomplish that? Well, three things. Firstly, of course, we need funding. There will be two sources of funding. So we're looking at high net worth individuals, usually people who suffer from tinnitus themselves, who are willing to contribute significant sums. And we actually have made some headway in that regard, and maybe I'll ask Sven to talk a bit about that in a moment. But we're also doing crowdfunding. So on our website, tinnitusquest.com, there's a donate button, and that's been live for, I think, like 2 months now. And we've raised about $13,000 through crowdfunding. So that's not a bad start. Secondly, it's really important that we involve the patient in everything we do. That's why we do this kind of public sessions, right? So we're going to be communicating about everything we do along the way. We're going to be updating our website. We have social media accounts. We're going to be doing a lot of public outreach, but we're also going to be involving patients very much directly in the decision making about the research we fund. So we have a separate patient advisory board. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And thirdly, of course, this is what it's really about. We want to fund, innovative, agile, exploratory research. I'll probably ask Dirk in a moment to define what we mean by exploratory research, talk a bit more about like the type of research that we're thinking about. But also, we really want to appeal to young researchers. It's a huge problem if there are not enough young researchers who are interested in tinnitus. So we also have to like actively go out and find these young people and entice them to work on tinnitus. And that's actually something we're doing just a few days ago. In fact, we had an event where we had invited 7 young researchers to pitch us their ideas for silencing tinnitus, and it was very interesting to hear the diversity of ideas, and definitely 1 or 2 that stood out there. But we have to do a lot more to go out and find these young people. Uh, Here you see a few of the people involved. It's not everyone, but this was me at the Tinnitus Research Initiative conference in Vancouver in June. And so with me is Dirk de Ridder and Hamid Jalilian, who are also in this call and who are part of our executive board, and Bertolt Langgut, who is part of our scientific advisory board. And something very important about our organizational structure is that patients actually have the majority voice. So you can see that by, if you look at the executive board, there's 3 patients. So me, Sven, and Marco, and then 2 researchers, Dirk and Hamid. And then, of course, we also have the scientific advisory boards who will be giving their opinions on research that we're looking to fund. And the patient advisory board will be doing the exact same thing, but really from a patient lens, really making sure that we fund things that patients are actually interested in, that patients think will actually benefit them. So very much patient driven. Well, what makes us unique? I mean, there are other existing tinnitus organizations and hearing organizations. There are not so many, actually, but there are others. We think what makes us unique is, well, first of all, we're the only non-profit purely focused on silencing tinnitus. We have some of the top researchers in the field on board. Like I mentioned, we're patient-driven. It's bottom-up. We already have commitments from several high net worth individuals to fund research. We're committed to complete transparency on the research that we fund and reporting on its progress, but also on the failures. If something doesn't work out, we feel it's equally important to report on that and learn from it. And we're also supported by the existing online patient community, Tinnitus Talk, which has been around since 2011 and was founded by Markus, also on this call, but he's off stage because he's our tech wizard for the day. Finally, a timeline. So you can see, as I mentioned, we're a very young organization. We were only legally established in Germany as a Verein, which is a type of nonprofit organization, in June. So really just a few months ago. Then we launched our website in July, started our social media in September. We've been doing these Q&A events now for the past few months. In October, we did something very important on the website. We launched a page called Stories. I would very much encourage you to go and look there because Jack Rubinacci, who is on this call, has been working on a very important project to get artists, people in creative professions to speak out about their tinnitus on video. And you can find the first few of those on the Stories page, but we'll be releasing a lot more. And as I mentioned, we just had this young researchers event, and we're actively looking to involve more young researchers. While all of this was happening, our key priority, and until the end of the year, and really until any time in the future, remains to raise as many funds as possible. Our aim is that when we kick off our grants program in hopefully early 2025, but definitely in 2025, that we have a million to disperse, which would mean we could fund at least 4 research projects. So that's coming up in 2025. So very important to understand that we're not actually funding research yet. Has been some misunderstanding with the previous Q&As that the researchers who were featured there were being funded by us. That is not the case. They're part of our organization and they will help us decide where the funding goes, but we're not funding anyone yet. We'll also be organizing a research brainstorm event in person in Germany, which will be a very different type of event than your traditional academic conference where people just come to talk about results of their studies. But it will really be brainstorming about solutions. With that said, of course, you can always learn more at our website, tinnitusquest.com, or contact us directly at info@tinnitusquest.com. I will now ask Sven to make some introductory remarks. And Sven, I think it would be also interesting if you could, talk a bit about from a personal perspective, like why this was important to you to start Tinnitus Quest and how the idea came about.
Sure. Thank you, Hazel. Well, yeah. First of all, I'm a tinnitus patient myself. I had tinnitus since I was 15 years old, so quite a long time. I'm 37 today. And yeah, over the time, as many tinnitus patients, I experienced some increase in my tinnitus through different situations where I didn't protect my ears enough, and yeah, I got to the point where first of all, I considered myself a very you know very interested patient, so I tried to stay up to date with research going on around the world, and it was quite easy for me to actually approach the top researchers and speak to them. And so since I'm an entrepreneur and I at least know how a company runs, I, just give it a thought if direct donations to certain project would be the right answer. And I did that and I still do that. But I came to the conclusion that the real problem the tinnitus community has is the lack of communication between the research side and the patient side. So as we all know, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about tinnitus out there, especially on the patient side, and that's not the fault of the patient. It's often the problem that most tinnitus patients approach their ENT, and the most heard answer around the world probably is, I can do nothing about it, just keep on living with it. And that's not true in every case. But of course, what's true is that we haven't found a single answer to tinnitus in general. Over the time, I think we the research developed from, I would say, from the ear to the brain. We know that tinnitus today is a more neurological problem. Of course, it can be triggered by different diseases of the ear, but it can also be triggered psychologically or through accidents or trauma or whatever it is. So in the end, I came to the conclusion that we have to fill this gap. And we, as patients, have to try to become part of the solution and not stay part of the problem. So this is where I try to approach the advocates in the field, which was, of course, Hazel and Marku with Tinnitus Hub, and then, of course, approach the leading researchers in the world if they're interested to be part of this quest. And I think what's also very important is that we don't have an NGO running in this field, particularly concentrated on silencing tinnitus. And I think that's very important that we keep, as an organization, we keep our head office costs very low and really focus on giving out as much money as we can collect. And there are two sides. I think especially the high net worth individuals are very important. I think nobody until today has approached them in a professional manner and actually gave them an opportunity to feel that they're part of those projects. Many people we spoke to did the same thing as I did in the beginning, to fund interesting projects directly. And the second thing that is very, very important is that we have to understand that due to the lack of funding, this field probably loses a lot of, especially young investigators. And it's very important that we give those young investigators a chance to develop a career in the field and actually give them a chance to progress with their ideas. So we have a chance to find a efficient treatment, ideally a cure in the future. So this is, I think, in total, what brought me to Tinnitus Quest.
Thank you, Sven. Could I ask Dirk to next, well, maybe first just introduce yourself briefly, but also talk about why Tinnitus Quest is important to you, and specifically that concept of exploratory research. I think that's interesting for people understand a bit better what is actually the type of research that we're looking to fund.
Yes. So, good day, everybody. I'm Dirk de Redder. I'm a neurosurgeon by training. I perform research in New Zealand and a little bit in Belgium, but predominantly in New Zealand, and co-run a neuromodulation clinic slash tinnitus clinic in Belgium. So I not only research and teach, but also try to apply whatever we develop into practical treatments. And this is where it is important to understand that there is actually two kinds of research. One kind of research is what we could call exploratory research, and the other one is solidifying research. The difference is that just like the early explorers, such as Stanley and Livingstone, when they were discovering parts of Africa, actually what they were doing was not very systematic. They would follow a river or follow a mountain range and more or less explore in a haphazard manner the uncharted, unknown territory. And this is very similar to what you could call exploratory neuroscience or exploratory tinnitus science, where um, it's not a fully systematic approach, but you go for where you think there might be very promising approaches. In contrast, the solidifying research is a research where you want to prove or disprove a model of how tinnitus is generated in the brain or the ear, or and therefore you need a lot of um, traditional, rigid scientific research. This is more akin to whenever Stanley and Livingstone had discovered or explored part of Africa, then after them came a second wave of people, way more systematized, like there would be a geologist, an anthropologist, a biologist, a zoologist. So it would be shiploads full of people to really chart the territory in detail. As you can imagine, an explorer is cheap, in contrast to the solidifying research that costs tremendous amount of money because there's so many people involved. And in tinnitus, we're still actually in the exploratory phase because we still, for example, have no signature in the brain of how tinnitus is generated. We have an idea. So a little bit of exploring has been done, but we don't know the details yet. This is where I think Tinnitus Quest is very important because the traditional grant agencies like the NIH or the European grant agencies, they seem to only give grants for solidifying research, which makes some sense. But on the other hand, it does not make sense to come into a completely unknown territory and immediately start with looking for details if you haven't seen the forest yet. So this is where I think tinnitus has been lagging behind, because it's very hard to get funding, even if you don't know yet what you're really looking for. And this is where the exploratory phase comes in. So if people have a good idea, can be researchers, can be tinnitus patients, can be anybody who's interested in tinnitus, and they want to explore this in using scientific methods. So you use the scientific methods, but the science is not the the, the sole purpose of it. Um, the goal is to find a treatment to silence the sound, and therefore we should probably do just like the explorers did: first explore and then do the solidifying work. And this is where Tinnitus Quest is fairly uniquely interested. The initial TRI was also having the same philosophy, and this is in contrast to most other granting agencies. So with that, I think it's very important that we support Tinnitus Quest, both as academics, as clinicians, but also as patients, to allow a more normal approach to finding a cure for tinnitus, rather than starting at the end and going backwards, starting with exploration.
I see a lot of questions have already come in, 54 to be precise. Marco is in the process of going through them, and he will soon be selecting some to pull up. I did notice some of you are asking more like personal advice type of questions, like what do I do with my tinnitus when it's like this, or what treatment should I try? That's not probably not going to be the type of questions we can address here. We did have those three previous Q&As that were 100% research focused, where we addressed a lot of questions like that, and you can go back and watch them. We might pick out a few of those if there's very interesting ones. We'll be focusing more on the like organizational type questions, the money questions, the awareness raising questions, and those kinds of things. Jack, would you mind introducing yourself and talk a little bit about the project that I just mentioned that you're working on, which people can find on our website under stories?
Yes, hello everyone. So I think the importance of what I'm doing is twofold. It's specifically to get artists and also patients to share their story on video. And I think the importance of that is twofold. One, it motivates the tinnitus community to get behind us. And it also hopefully unites the tinnitus community to get together and push forward with us. Because I think that if you think that there's 750 million people in the world affected by tinnitus, that's a lot of people. And if we can get some form of unity, some form of energy behind that, there's a lot that we can achieve. There really is. So I think the videos sort of reflect back to the tinnitus community how they feel. They also reflect that we are a serious foundation doing a lot of work. So I think that's powerful. But I also think it's powerful on another level, because if we can get musicians, celebrities, actors, anyone who has a voice that can amplify our voice, when I say our, I mean a tinnitus community voice, we can also show the world that tinnitus is not just something to be getting on with, that it actually is a serious problem for many people. And I think that the more that we can do that, the more that we can raise funds, of course, funds for research, but also hopefully further down the line, get more and more people involved behind us in terms of funding. And also, lastly, and I think on a slightly less important, but still very important for the people involved, is the fact that it gives people an opportunity to see people just like them, whether they are musicians, because I know that I'm a musician myself. That's what I do. I'm a professional musician. I know that there are so many musicians who are not necessarily talking about it. Maybe they don't feel that they have a platform to talk to about it. They don't talk to their band about it. And some of these guys are on top level bands. So it also gives them a sense of hope a sense of feeling that they're not so alone, but also patience, of course, as well as patience, because we started to do patient videos, and some of these videos are really powerful. They're having a platform and an opportunity to share their personal story. And again, it reflects back to the tinnitus community, because I'm sure that many people in the tinnitus community can, relate to everything that these people are sharing. And again, it's about crystallizing the energy and focusing it in one point, and hopefully that's Tinnitus Quest. Because if we can get momentum, think of that. Just think of the power: 750 million people coming together. Of course, that's not, those figures are absurd, but just think if we could get just 10% of that. And to do that, I think that for too long, there's been no platform. There's been nowhere where people can sort of really share their stories on video, because video is very much the medium of the moment. So that's the beautiful thing about what I'm doing. I feel so motivated to do it because as a tinnitus patient myself for 22 years now, I have very loud tinnitus, and being a musician, it's sort of very personal. So personal to my work and stuff. So I feel very motivated. And just to finish off, the response that we're getting from, I don't like the word celebrities, but people, artists who are successful, the response that we are getting is really, really strong. And we're getting more and more and more. When I first started sending out emails in February, it was very difficult. Now it's becoming much more a case of people are getting back to me, and it's becoming much more powerful. So yeah, it's a really motivating thing to be involved in. Actually, it's become a real obsession of mine. Actually, so yeah, that's sort of my role in the foundation.
Jack, can you see the question that came in here from Carl? I think you're the perfect person to answer it.
Yeah, again, it goes back to, I think raising awareness is a cliched phrase that we've heard too many times. I don't think it's about raising awareness. I think it's about reflecting back to the tinnitus community what they're feeling. That's more about what we're doing, because there's enough of us. We don't need to necessarily raise awareness. There's enough of us to be getting on with. So if we can start there. So a documentary is actually a really good idea. I did actually see that comment. I think it's a great idea. I think it's not very hard to do nowadays, because camera equipment, before, 10, 15 years ago, it would seem like a very difficult thing to do. I don't think it's a very difficult thing to do. And I don't think I can think of, I mean, there was that film Drive, and there's also been the film A Star is Born. And I was so emotionally involved in that film, because I thought finally someone, and I think that did have an effect, because people did start to talk about tinnitus on a global level. But I think there is room to do a documentary, and I don't think it would cost too much. Um, but I think that's something that maybe in 2025 we could look at. But at the moment, I think that the videos that we're doing with the musicians, when you see more and more of them, you'll start to see that there really is something, a real momentum happening. And perhaps we can develop that into a documentary, including musicians and celebrities from around the world. Maybe that would be more of an impetus for them to, the higher level A-list celebrities. Because just to conclude, we haven't reached the sort of the really, I, I don't like to categorize artists, but we haven't reached people like Chris Martin or David Grohl. That's not to put the artists in categories, because I don't like that. But people who have a truly global audience is probably the best way that I'd like to put it, because the artists that we have are absolutely incredible, every single one of them.
More questions coming in that seems to be geared towards you, Jack. So if you could answer this one.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, it's not really a question so much. Someone offering their support. Also nice.
Yeah. This is again the beautiful thing about what we're doing with Tinnitus Quest, because if you look at things on a mathematical level, there must be a load of incredible people amongst you. The tinnitus community has people from all walks of life. Like, I'm getting messages from all over the world from people that are doing incredible work in their day-to-day work. Again, this is the beautiful thing about Tinnitus Quest. If we can harness that, what can possibly stop us? Nothing, in my opinion. So in answer to the person that left that message, yes, absolutely. Please contact me. jack@tinnitusquest.com, JACK@tinnitusquest.com. I would love to hear your ideas, and we'd very much appreciate your help, because again, this is another example. It's another example of what can be achieved with a little bit of unity. And I'm finding that the more people see what we're doing, the more they want to get involved, because, you know, it's always, I had a very interesting conversation with a well-known music executive this week. And the phrase that he said is that it's hard to put the first scores on the door. But he said to me, Jack, you've got the first scores on the door now. So that was the hard part. But I think if we can get more and more people involved, and to the person that left that comment, yes, absolutely. Please do get in contact. I would love to hear your ideas.
Thanks, Jack. I would like to give Hamid a chance to introduce himself now that hopefully we can hear him.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Hamid Jalalian. I'm a professor at the University of California, Irvine. And I've been working on tinnitus for probably more than 25 years, trying to solve it. And when Sven asked me to be involved, it's really been truly a quest for me to try to solve tinnitus and to find a cure. And so this sort of was really the most natural thing for me to be involved with, is a quest. My Tinnitus Quest is sort of, the goal is to silence tinnitus. So it's sort of, it's a privilege to be a part of this great group of people who's trying to solve this problem.
Marco, do we have more questions? I mean, I know we have questions, but do you have some selected that we can start answering? Oh, right, here we go. The $1 million question, which we know is how long is a piece of string type question. What does the board envisage as a realistic goal for Tinnitus Quest over the next 2-3 years with regard to moving actual treatment strategies forward? Okay, I'm going to give a... I'm not going to directly try to answer that question, but I'll make a little start and hand it over to whoever else wants to jump in. So the first thing is that, so when we were kind of brainstorming as to what type of research is needed to cure, or rather silence, tinnitus, we came up with 3 categories, but we decided to focus on one of those. And so the first important category is like fundamental research to understand the basic mechanisms of tinnitus. Very important to ultimately be able to cure it. Second is finding an objective measure to actually be able to measure tinnitus, in the lab, without having people fill in surveys and things like that, which would also hugely encourage commercial parties to jump in and invest in tinnitus. And thirdly was trying out experimental new treatments. And we decided to focus on that third category because we felt that we could get the most bang for our buck there, and with relatively small investments and probably a lot of trial and error as well, let's be honest, make some progress fairly quickly. Maybe I'll ask Dirk to be the next one to try to answer this question, and then whoever else wants to jump in, feel free.
Yes, so I do agree with Hazel that out of those 3 categories, the first one is probably is the expensive approach and very slow approach, because if you find one channel that is changed in tinnitus, then you have to find a product to modify it, and then you have to do animal research and then clinical research. So that's a very long shot goal. It's the solidifying approach. Finding a biomarker or a signature of tinnitus, so just like you measure your blood pressure, that can tell you, well, you have hypertension or not. We should certainly look for a signature, but and that signature can then help to tailor the development of new treatments. So that's certainly a beneficial approach. But on the other hand, sometimes we can explore in a different way by trying to understand what is happening, for example, even in case reports where somebody has tinnitus that disappeared because of, for example, a stroke in the brain, or because they ate something that had a very strange but profound effect, and then following up on those cases can be very worthwhile. And as Hazel said, it doesn't cost all that much. Exploration is basically just like the explorers. It's the cost of people. Of course, it can come at an extra cost if you need a specific device to test your idea. But in general, it's not as expensive as doing the solidifying research. So I fully agree that we should embark on this approach. Where shall we stand within 2 to 3 years? Well, in parallel, there is research being done to look for objective markers. So I hope that within maybe 3, 4 years, we might have an objective marker, and that we can then in parallel embark on how can we modify it, how can we normalize it, um, but also in parallel look for different approaches. And different approaches can be either by trying to stimulate or modulate brain activity that we already know is involved in tinnitus. So that's by doing neuromodulation. And within neuromodulation, there is different parts. You can electrically modulate the brain, magnetically, and now also with ultrasound and with even with light, so that we should be open and not a priori say what it should be electrical. No, maybe it's light stimulation is better, or ultrasound stimulation is better. So neuromodulation is certainly one approach. The second approach would be to allow the brain to be plastic, which means to for the brain to adjust, because ultimately tinnitus is the response of what we call maladaptive and unfortunate adaptation of the brain to usually a loss of sound, but it doesn't have to be like that. So we can try to increase that. One example is by certain medications, but also by certain psychedelics. And so we should be open-minded and not on before and say, no, we should not embark on that direction because of whatever reasons. So, and then the third one could be pharmacological approaches. And the difference between an exploratory and a traditional pharmacological approach is that in a traditional approach, you first want to understand which receptors or which channels in the brain are involved, and then design a drug specifically for that. With the exploratory approach, you would probably do it somewhat differently and say, well, we know there is, let's say, 4 or 5 neurotransmitters involved, and therefore we will design a cocktail that attack those 5 different ones and give very low dose, but multiple approaches, which is not new. I mean, this is an idea that has been used in immunology before, where, for example, HIV is currently treatable by using 4 different medications that work via different mechanism of action, and we should be take in all this information from other fields in order to do so. But we should not say, well, we should only go pharmacologically. Maybe we have to combine pharmacology with sound therapy, with neuromodulation. So using this multimodal approach, which we've likened to like going to a war, where you have ground troops, Air Force and Navy collaborating and trying to conquer the enemy, which in our case is ultimately tinnitus. So all of this can be started, but we have to accept that part of the outcome might have to be luck. And this is typical for exploration, where you have to be somewhat lucky. But of course, you can only win the lottery if you play it. You can only find a solution if you embark on multiple different approaches simultaneously, and then further take the direction that seems to be most promising. So within 2 to 3 years, we should embark at least on all these different potential approaches, and then start following up in the next years on the most promising ones. And maybe within 3 years, we might say, well, we have we can benefit, let's say 20% of the people with tinnitus, not 100% yet, but 20% because of this and this and this approach. And then because there will not be one single approach that will work for everybody. And this is what we have to realize. Just like there is not one single product that treats hypertension in everybody. Depending on the cause, you might have to use different products, and in tinnitus it will be the same. So within 2 to 3 years, we will have started the exploratory phase of multiple paths that each of them might lead to a success in maybe 10, 20, 30% of the people.
I'm curious to hear what Hamid thinks. Like in 2 to 3 years, what do you think is achievable for Tinnitus Quest? Like realistically.
I would probably echo Dirk's comments. I think we will probably get to a what we call a biomarker, a sort of a way to objectively measure tinnitus, so without the need for a survey. I think we will probably have made a lot of progress on some devices that are intended for electric stimulation, either at the brain level or the ear level. I think sort of my approach, and from a research standpoint, we've been approaching it from two different areas, and I think um, these are areas that multiple other people are working on, and I think Tinnitus Quest is going to be funding a lot of these projects. Not my projects; we can't fund our own projects, but other people's projects, which is again stimulation at the brain level, which we do through the ear electrically. And then reducing the factors that make the tinnitus loud. One of the problems that a lot of people have is sort of the fluctuating nature of the tinnitus, meaning some days that's really loud and it's really bothersome, and some days it's quiet, it doesn't bother them as much. And we have a pretty good idea of actually why that is now. This is a lot of the work that we've been doing related to how migraine modulates tinnitus. There's some people who get a migraine, they don't get a headache. They're just tinnitus gets louder. And I think there's going to be a lot of progress on that. I think there are other people who have started working on this as well. And I think there's going to be some clinical trials that are going to come um, eventually from in this that will show that some of these migraine directed therapies are going to be effective for this. I see a lot of questions related to trigeminal nerve and things like that. And so trigeminal nerve is very much involved in the loudness of the tinnitus, not in the generation of it to begin with. And I think there's going to be some work in that area. So I think what we would really like to achieve would be hair cell regeneration, which would solve the problem. However, that's a much longer term goal. I think in the short term, we're going to have probably biomarker and probably some device related in activity, and then some maybe medication.
Thank you, Hamid. I see also that there are a lot of questions that around both the linear device and the Susan Shore device. Those were both extensively discussed in the first 3 Q&As that we did. So you can go back and watch those and learn what Hamid and Dirk, as well as Bertolt, who's not here today, think about those devices. Marco, do you have another question for us? Ooh, Sven, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, first of all, I have already been committed in funding Tinnitus Quest. So, of course, it's I would say also my project. So, of course, over the next years, if my company runs the way it does at the moment, then of course I will be committed to funding Tinnitus Quest. And that's actually a very important question. I think it doesn't just, it is an important question for me. I think it's for all high net worth individuals that will finance us hopefully in the future, is that what we need is a constant stream of donation. So that is very important. And that and I just want to make clear that not just high net worth individuals can solve the problem alone. It's a mix of crowdfunding from every patient around the world. Doesn't matter if he can spend $1, $5, 10, whatever it is. It's a combination, and that's so important. We need those sustainable incomes to secure that we fund the projects every year, and that we can, somewhat raise our seriousness in the whole field to be a very reliable partner for researchers around the world who have an idea how to solve this problem. So I think that's a very important question.
Yeah. Do you also want to maybe quickly comment on the where we are in 2 to 3 years question from your perspective?
Yeah, I think if I would have to bet on something, then I think I would always bet on technology, because the everything in technology is developing so quickly. I mean, if you just try to compare how what were you able to do with your phone 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and what can you do now? And I mean, this is just a dramatic increase in usability and speed and whatever there is in the world. And I think especially artificial intelligence will increase the development of future technologies so quickly. And if you look what's happened in the last 50, 60 years, we have an exponential growth of development speed. So if you ask me today, I would bet that we will see implant technology, um, either it's in the brain or in the ear, that will probably help a lot of patients.
Cool. Marco, do we have more questions? Yes. Why is Tinnitus Quest a non-profit organization? I would reckon that a for-profit would be more efficient to attract funding, such as from venture capitalists. I think, Sven, this is a perfect one for you because it was your idea to start this organization.
Well, I mean, there's not an easy answer to that. I think, in terms of what the idea was, we're not acting as a company. So if we would act as a company, then we would have to find investors, and investors only invest into projects that we propose them to them ourselves. So in case I would be a scientist and I would have a great idea how to solve this problem, then you're right. But what we would try here is we try another source of funding, because venture capitalists always fund very, projects that have actually developed out of the phases that we target in the next years. So it's not that venture capitalists just spray their money around and see what's coming out. They will have a look at a very certain project that has proven in first clinical trials to be reliable, which does not mean that they're in the end actually coming to market. Just because something has shown some clinical impact in phase 1 and phase 2 studies does not mean that in real world data in the end will show the same. And so venture capitalists target those kinds of projects. I'm very sure that out of Tinnitus Quest work in the next years, we will see a couple of developments that maybe projects we initially financed will develop to a point where venture capitalists will step in.
That's exactly right, Sven. We'd have a hard time pitching to venture capitalists now because we don't have a concrete solution to pitch, right? But once we find hopefully a few of those, it would have to be taken to the next stage by large-scale commercial investment. And that's actually a much more expensive part of the process than what we are doing. So finding an initial idea that could be a solution is relatively cheap. Then bringing it to market, you have to go through all the clinical trials, all the regulatory approvals. You have to create a production process for your pill or device, marketing, pricing, distribution, all of those things. And that's where it actually gets really expensive. So we would probably need those kinds of investments.
And I think this is where I think a very important thing comes in. I see a lot of questions about Susan Scholl's device, and I think the problem that a lot of people may not just understand the right way is it's a very different thing that a device showed clinical impact in a trial and actually becoming a real world um, device on the market and accessible to patients, because it has a lot of things to do with usability and how can a patient who, especially if you're working with a device that the patient takes home, so it's nothing that's applied in a clinic under professional surveillance, that you take home is used the right way. And I think this is a very tough thing to do, and especially if you want to finance the last part of this development, you really need a very, very good answer, because those are questions that most investors in the world will ask you. It's just not enough to have the right idea and show clinical proof, but you, especially if it's a device, you really have to show how is it working on the patient and at home in a real world environment, because otherwise you will get the problem that most patients will be not happy with the solution, or maybe you have an outcome which is totally different than you expected. So I think this is a very important thing why I think Susan Scholl's device is not on the market yet.
All right, let's tackle a few more questions. And oh, there we go. Sven, I know a young researcher. Can they join the event in Germany? Can you tell more about the event?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, what we're working on at the moment is our grants program. So I think we'll have a further development in Tinnitus Quest, where we discussed to implement a grants board. I think this is under discussion at the moment, because we want more experts in the field to work with us. And absolutely, as soon as we have the right time and the right setup for this meeting in Germany, of course, we will encourage young researchers around the world to join, especially since we will not have a typical grants program. So that's also a thing I think that makes us special. Most grant agencies have very complicated grant application processes. And I think I also saw a question about that. And what we want to do is we want to, use something out of the business world, which is pitching for a project where you just have to really quickly show a professional audience what is your idea, how do you want to do it, how long it's going to take, and how much will it cost. And this will especially be evaluated by of course the professionals in our executive board, by a grants board, and by our patient and scientific advisory board. And then of course the executive board will try to make the right decisions. Of course, we would like to fund everything, but in the end, we also work with limited resources, and so I think that's a very important thing.
Related, but I just want to, well, thank you, Olivia, for the kind words. First of all, that's very nice to hear. What will be the first research we fund? That's hard to say since we haven't gotten research applications yet, but maybe if I would reframe it, what would be the criteria by which we assess the research projects that we fund, I think, is also a good way of looking at it. So, what are we really looking for in those first few projects? And I will also ask Dirk and Amit to weigh in on that as well.
The projects to be funded are projects where, after reading the concept, both the scientific committee as well as us from the executive board would say, yeah, this actually has a chance of really making a big impact. And with big impact, the idea is to really make a difference in the loudness perception. So if people propose, well, I will do some kind of treatment where maybe the suffering might be reduced by 10%, which is the average of what you get with a lot of current treatments like CBT, acupuncture, TDCS, TMS, etc. This is not what we were looking for. So this is not what we will probably look for to fund. What we will look for fund, even though it might come at a higher risk that it doesn't do anything, but are those projects where, with whatever influence, whether it's pharmacological, electrical stimulation, as what Hamid said earlier on, or whether it is based on any other intervention, but that has some good chance that it can make a big impact, that's what we will try and fund, rather than small incremental improvements in making the people suffer 10% less. Because ultimately, if you suffer on the scale from 0 to 100, 90%, and it's reduced to 80%, well, you haven't really made a big impact. So the goal is big impact, big changes with whatever creative solution people, hopefully young researchers, will come up with.
And Dirk, I mean, this is something I've been, as a patient, as a sufferer, been frustrated with for years, because I try to keep up with the research and I read the studies that come out, and it's always touted as a success when they manage to achieve a 13-point reduction on the tinnitus handicap inventory. That's 13 points on a 100-point scale, which basically just means people feel slightly better, but that's then somehow considered, a success. Whereas, like, from a patient point of view, not so much. So we want to do a lot better than that. I think the only exception that I learned from you, Dirk, the only exception to that was cochlear implants, where some people have actually received silence or something close to it. But it's also obviously not something you can use on everyone. Hamid, I'm curious to hear from you, like, and for the audience to understand, we haven't actually put on paper, like, these are the rules or the criteria to get a grant from us. So we're kind of just brainstorming out loud here. But Hamid, if we come to the point that we're assessing research proposals, how would you personally look at what's the most viable type of proposal?
Thank you. Yes. You know, at least in the United States, the funding agencies fund the kind of research that Dirk was talking about, small incremental improvements, because they want a lot of preliminary data that shows something works, and then they just want a little bit improvement over that. And unfortunately, that it brings us to the state where we're at now. We don't have a cure, and part of the problem is, at least the major funding agencies in the United States don't like risk. They say, they want to make sure whatever is funded has a result for sure. And that requires, like, almost half the project has to be done. But for a new idea, is sort of a novel idea to try to silence, it might have a little higher risk, but has a much higher reward if it's successful. And that's what I would imagine being sort of the types of projects that we would be funding, because the incremental improvements, they will have much better success with the major funding agencies, which typically is the government, but is the high risk, high reward is generally, at least in our institution and in the United States, oftentimes is funded through philanthropy. And so Tinnitus Quest is basically filling that gap um, for the high risk, high reward. And I imagine that's what we're going to want to do is does this have a very good chance of making a big change? It doesn't have to be 100%, but as long as it's better than maybe 50%, that would give me sort of some confidence. Oh, this is worth basically investing in. I mean, we're kind of looking at it like, the question was about venture capital. Is it worth the investment? Because this ultimately this is money from donors, and we have to be very responsible with it, and we want to make sure we're doing what's best for the community, and the intent of the donors, and the purpose of Tinnitus Quest is silencing tinnitus, and that's what we want to be able to achieve with the project. Will get us closer and closer to that stage.
Percent. All right, let's tackle more questions because we have many still pending. Marco? And if you don't have one, I will come up with one. Okay. I will Tinnitus Quest report on research projects. Yes, that's very important because what we've noticed, and again, like speaking from a patient perspective myself and someone I've been working together with Marco on managing the tinnitus talk community for many years, him much longer, and I've been to a lot of research conferences, kind of trying to represent patients there, but something I see so much frustration among suffers is that they never hear about what's going on, right? You maybe hear that, oh, this new study is starting. And you're like, oh, that sounds exciting, and I want to know about that study. And then you literally don't hear anything for 5 years until the paper is published. And researchers are maybe for good reason, like maybe they're just too busy or they're not trained in public communication. I think that can be an issue as well, right? But they don't communicate about it while the research is going on. And you see the same with some of the existing funding programs for hearing or tinnitus research. There's like no updates about it. We want to do that very differently. We will require everyone that gets a grant from Tinnitus Quest to report on a quarterly basis. And that doesn't have to be a very heavy report. It could be just a paragraph about this is what we worked on in the past 3 months. This is what's going well. This is what's not going well. But that way people feel involved in the research and they see that something's happening and that there is progress. So yeah, Sven, do you want to add anything to like how we're going to report on research?
Yeah, I think a very constant update on our social media platforms, on our Q&As is something that's very important. Especially because it's not something scientists are used to, even in projects. So I think what really differs us, really makes us special in the end, is that if we fund a project, what we ask for is a constant stream of updates. It doesn't need to be big updates all the time with, a very long scientific explanations, but just, to see where's the project at the moment, where is it standing, do we have some preliminary results, and so on. I think this is a very important thing. So yeah, we'll use our website, we'll use our social media channels, and I think this is something where we quite unique. And I think one of the question was also why should I donate to Tinnitus Quest and or ATA and so on. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, in general, I think it's very important to be part of the solution, and it doesn't really make sense to, of course, always complain that nothing is being done around the world, and then not just try to be part of the solution, even if it's a really tiny bit. And this means, of course, to promote projects like Tinnitus Quest, and of course, if you're able to donate. I think Tinnitus Quest, and this is a very important thing, is that our head office costs. So the costs that just go into running an NGO are very low amongst us. So all the people that work on those projects are working mostly on their free time and dedicate a lot of time into it. And this is where we try that we use the majority of the funds, 90% plus, that will go into the project. And I think that's a very important thing. And I think that ATA or Tinnitus UK have not shown those numbers in the past. And of course, they also have a different approach. I mean, large part of their mission is also to be able to actually advise patients. So a lot of patients don't get any advice from their doctors. So it's very important that their agencies that also work in the area of tinnitus management. And I think this is very important. Tinnitus Quest will not do that. So our sole mission is to fund research projects around the world to be able to silence tinnitus. So if you're interested in this sole mission, then I think Tinnitus Quest, with its very efficient cost structure and I think very very interesting board structure, is I think the right place for your donation if you want to go directly into tinnitus research.
Yeah, just a small correction there because I don't want to set the expectations too high. You said 90% directly to research. I think we had talked about 80%, but we still have to actually decide on the exact percentage, and it also depends on how much money we're getting in. It's easier to keep overhead relatively low when you have more money coming in as well.
Sure. Yeah,
But it will be something around there, right? So, and we'll communicate about that when we have more detailed numbers. Will Tinnitus Quest fund grants to close the gap between researchers and the tinnitus community? Will they fund citizen scientists? I think that's very interesting. A perfect example is the lack of research understanding or even systematic description of reactive tinnitus. Yes, I think that's a very interesting point with the reactive tinnitus. When we did the first 3 Q&As, which again were more just purely research focused, so with Hamid, with Dirk, and with Bertold, lots of questions about reactive tinnitus, like why is my tinnitus reactive? What can I do about it? And it's almost, as far as I know, is very little studies on it, even though patients are clearly very interested in it. But yeah, that's maybe a bit of a side angle. Could you pull up the question again, Marco? I think there were like a lot of details there that, yeah, well, okay, how to close the gap between researchers and the community. Okay. I will ask Sven first to answer, and then anyone else who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I think that's kind of hard to say because in the end, for the projects we are targeting, I think you have to have a scientific environment, maybe a lab, maybe a clinic, maybe at least something that you're working with patients. So I think it will very much depend. But as we also look at proposals that are kind of outside the box, maybe from fields where we can't even think of today, who might have an idea, an interesting idea, how to solve that. And of course, this can also come from a citizen if he's working in the field and has a great idea and an idea how to actually develop this project, then absolutely that's a possibility.
We discussed this, but just thinking out loud, I mean, we do have the Tinnitus Talk community that Marco and I manage, and we have in the past done surveys amongst that community where we were able to achieve sample sizes much higher than what academia would typically achieve, so up to I think 9,000 respondents per survey. So I think that's also an example of citizen science where we could do things like with, using surveys amongst the community to come up with leads for new research. But anyway, it's just an idea that came to mind just now. So let's go to the next question. Oh, outside of funding, what can the average person who suffers from tinnitus do to support your goals? Yeah, I think Dirk already mentioned something interesting, which is these case studies of where tinnitus suddenly got a lot better because they did a treatment for a different condition or some other weird thing that unexpectedly changed their tinnitus. So I think hearing about these kind of case studies can be relevant. And you can always, there's a button on our website where I think it's called submit an idea. So you can submit research ideas there. That's one thing you can do. Sven, are there other things people can do?
Yeah, I think sharing our social media channels and follow them is a very important thing because it just increases our audience and potential donor base, which is, I think, very important. So yeah, those are very important things you can do besides donating.
Absolutely. All right. Oh, Sven, this is a personal one. How severe is your tinnitus? Do you have pain? Okay.
No, I don't have pain. But yeah, I think it's always a hard question for somebody. How severe is your tinnitus? Because it generates an idea. If I say my tinnitus is severe, which does not mean it's worse than yours or better than yours. It's always I would say a thing in relation to others. It's very hard to say. I would say I have a very large tinnitus for myself, so it's something that bothers me a lot. And it's not super high pitch. It's, I would say, medium pitch, single tone hissing, and as I said, no pain at all.
I just want to check if we can hear Jack and if you still want to answer the question asked earlier. Jack? Yeah?
Yeah, I think that what makes this foundation different to the others, in my opinion, is that it's trying to actively get the tinnitus community to get involved. I think that a lot of the other foundations are trying to support, which is great, but Tinnitus Quest is actually trying to get the tinnitus community to be part of what we're doing. I think that's what is a real motivator for me to be part of this.
Right. Let's go to another question. And if we're out of organizational questions, I think we can also take some research questions. But okay, no, here's another organizational question. What does it take to become part of the patient advisory board? Well, I will. So we have two existing members of the board, and they are now recruiting more. So we'll go to 5 probably. So we're actually already quite close to finishing that process. So it's probably a bit late at this point if you want to apply, but we might have rotation in future, and people can apply. But I think the idea is that you have to be passionate um, about research, about helping others with tinnitus. Um, I think you need a bit of a basic understanding about research concepts because it's probably pretty hard to assess research proposals without a basic understanding of research methods and things like that. So that is important. But most important is that you're able to look at the research from a patient lens and really think about, can this help me or others like me? All right. Was there another question that just popped up, or did I imagine that? I will just want to put up this one. That's nice. Deeply thank all the Tinnitus Quest team. Okay, maybe I'll just pull up a few research related ones because there were so many and so many people do want to know about the research, even though we did, spend a lot of time covering that in our first 3 Q&As. But partnering with established hearing loss research, I think I would like to hear both Dirk and Hamid's perspective on that. Maybe Hamid, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. So I think it's definitely something worth looking into. It just depends on whether the projects kind of line up with what our mission is. There was a lot of basic, excuse me, hearing loss kind of mechanism research that's funded by Hearing Research Institute, which isn't really what our focus is. I mean, if it's something that is maybe a little bit later stage in terms of um, hearing regeneration, um, uh, that would line up with what we're doing, which solves the critical element of hair cell regeneration, which is actually getting the nerves connected to the hair cells. I think that would be of interest to us, but probably just most basic hearing research probably does not line up with what we're hoping to achieve, which is a cure for tinnitus. I think if somebody has figured out the hair cell regeneration and wants to figure out the connecting it to neurons, which is actually the part that hasn't been figured out, then that's something worth exploring, because if you can connect a newly generated hair cell to the neuron, then that would actually regenerate hearing and actually solve tinnitus. But other than that, I don't, it all depends, of course, on the project. But I mean, I think we're open to anything, but as long as the goal is curing tinnitus.
Of course, one of the main triggers for tinnitus, um, understanding hearing loss in itself is probably, again, more looking into the solidifying approach of tinnitus, whereas when it leads to a treatment that uh, can improve hearing loss and as well tinnitus, then of course it becomes of interest. But the primary understanding, for example, the genetic causes of hearing loss, etc., might be of less relevance directly to finding a solution. Whereas if you say, well, we've got X or Y or Z genes that are correlated with the tinnitus loudness, and those genes can lead to a better understanding of whatever mechanisms are involved. That could, of course, be of interest, but there has to be a true benefit for silencing the tinnitus sound and not just only improving the hearing loss.
We fund this, I would say, since it's in progress and being funded, maybe they don't need us, but what do you think, Dirk?
Well, yeah, also it does depend. So if there is already a commercial product, then it's probably not to Tinnitus Quest to fund research with a product that's already commercially available. Whereas if it is to find the concept, see if the concept is right before the stage of commercialization, as has been nicely explained by Hazel earlier on and by Sven, what the difficulty is to translate something that seems to work to a commercial product. Um, what Tinnitus Quest really wants to do is come up with novel or innovative treatment solutions that can then secondarily be commercialized by maybe other entities, except if Tinnitus Quest in the future would say, well, we're going to develop this because it's so promising that we will do it ourselves. But what you really want is to generate a fountain or a bucket full of potential solutions that can give a benefit, and not fund research for commercial products to see whether it really is worthwhile or not.
Question that I pulled up in a way. I think it's a similar story, and it would seem probably very complicated to do something like this also legally and financially. Although I could imagine if we're talking about off-label things that we could trial. No, sorry, I meant off-patent drugs, where the patent is expired. Maybe there could be trials we could do, or small tests.
Yes, so repurposing of, as Hazel is saying, repurposing of products that might seem to benefit tinnitus is certainly a possibility. And I do think that if there is any drug that systematically seems to improve tinnitus in a group of people with tinnitus, and this is where the community again becomes very important, that we as researchers would love to know from tinnitus patients which medications, but also food supplements, which foods do make a difference, that can then be potentially linked to a repurposing of a drug that is out of patent to be of benefit. So there is this interaction that we as researchers need with the community to come up with or suggest potential avenues of repurposing drugs, as Hazel was talking about.
Using Shore's device. I mean, so many people want to know about it, and I think this question is kind of insinuating like, can we do something in parallel or separate from her team that is still based on like the same concepts, essentially?
Yeah. So, well, for the outcomes of the studies, we've discussed these in the previous uh, meetings. I don't think that Tinnitus Quest should be involved in developing the Susan Shore device, but Tinnitus Quest should be involved in looking at other potential products that might be doing something similar, just like you would have a couple of different medications that work on the same problem. You can have beta blockers, calcium antagonists, etc., that treat heart problems. And I think Tinnitus Quest could be involved in further developing, whether it is bimodal stimulation, like in Susan Shore's device, or saying, okay, well, this seems to be promising, but it's not the solution yet. Can we go to trimodal stimulation, or can we combine bimodal stimulation with medication, or can we just further improve on the beneficial results that Susan Shore's device seems to get? I think that's a task for Tinnitus Quest. Helping to develop the product itself, I don't think is a task for Tinnitus Quest. That's a task for a commercial entity, for a company, for venture capitalists to invest into. Tinnitus Quest should look into the potential of even improving the beneficial results to a further stage.
Right. I just want to check if you have anything to add to that. Oh, sorry, we're already at the next question. Hamid, I'll get to you in a moment. Dirk, let's answer this question, because I know you mentioned cochlear implants as the only treatment I think that has really shown to silence tinnitus in some people. So can this be applied more widely?
Yeah, the problem, of course, the traditional indication for a cochlear implant is that you have to be bilaterally deaf. Studies have shown that in unilaterally people who are deaf unilaterally, that they can have a cochlear implant in their deaf ear, and that it does not dramatically interfere with the normal hearing from the other side. There is some studies are also looking and developing short cochlear implants, but I think Hamid can give some better details about that, where you only insert, you do not fully insert a long electrode into the cochlea, so you can still keep some hearing that is still preserved, and only partially use electronic hearing. So there is a steady advance in how cochlear implants can be used. The problem, however, is it's still invasive surgery, and it does require some severe form of hearing loss. So a non or less aggressive surgical approach would be preferred. And I think Hamid is the perfect person to discuss that in a little bit more detail.
Sure. So, I think that it's a great question, because, you know, that sort of was the inspiration for our work, is that cochlear implants do work to silence tinnitus because they electrically stimulate the nerve cells that still remain, even though you've lost the hair cells. So, hair cells are the ones that pick up the vibration of sound. The nerve cells are the ones that transmit the information to the brain. The nerve cells stay alive for many years after you've lost the hair cells. And uh, if you electrically stimulate those nerve cells, you can hear. And by restoring the ability to hear, then tinnitus gets silenced because tinnitus is sort of the brain's reaction in a way to the loss of those cells. Now, we have been working on a sort of non-invasive device, a device that would get placed, I should say non-invasive, but minimally invasive, gets placed behind the eardrum, but does not enter the inner ear. It does not enter the so-called cochlea. So it's more, sits on the outside wall of it. There's another group that's working on a similar device. And I think that type of device is what's going to probably, uh, at least as a first step towards some other things, would be more likely to get to market sooner, because it's a lot easier to get, FDA approval, at least in the United States and in Europe, the CE approval, for a device that does not get inside the inner ear, which has a chance of causing deafness. Because even if you place the cochlear implant perfectly and you do as fabulous a job as anybody can do in the world, there's still about a 10% chance you could actually cause deafness, even with a very short electrode. So it's just not worth the risk. And it would be unlikely that the FDA would approve it. There was actually a company in the United States that was trying to bring such device to market with a very short electrode, that they couldn't get enough funding, and so they went out of business. So I think that's something that will come, an electric stimulation device that will be placed behind the eardrum, that's not inside the cochlea. Um, we and others are working on a device that sits in the ear canal, and is against the eardrum, uh, which we found in our sort of preliminary research. It works in about 40% of people to actually make the tinnitus very quiet. So I think there's going to be electric stimulation devices where there may be multiple different devices that will come, uh, non-invasive ones in the ear canal, more invasive ones behind the eardrum. Will there be a cochlear implant? I don't think so, but it's quite possible. I did want to mention one other thing about the citizen researcher,
Yeah,
and I
go
think a lot of our ideas come from patients. A lot of the things that I think about are at the end of a long day of seeing a lot of patients, is I'm thinking, you know, there was a pattern between these couple of patients that mentioned this specific thing, and I've heard this before from other patients, and this is something we need to look into. And so I think getting information from patients um, for ideas, I think the reactive tinnitus beings are one of those. I recently wrote a little blog post about it. If someone's interested in reading it, just Google my name and tinnitus, a reactive tinnitus. And and then I got a lot of feedback saying I should write this as a scientific article because no one's actually written about it. And this really came from a lot of patients talking about this, how their tinnitus reacts to even small levels of sound, not even very loud levels of sound. So I think it's very interesting. I think we're open to that kind of thing. But traditionally, research has been done in institutions. But if people have ideas to bring to the board, or the scientific advisory board, then we're definitely interested in listening to what patients have to say.
Yeah, 100%. While we wait for the next question to get pulled up, Hamid, did you want to add anything to the discussion around repurposing of existing drugs or treatments? Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. So I think repurposing is actually something that's definitely useful. We have actually been doing some of that work. In fact, using sort of repurposed, basically migraine preventative drugs for treatment of tinnitus. Our clinical trial was just accepted for publication, and it showed that there was more effect with the drugs than placebo group. We actually had two sets of uh, combined meds. So we had three groups. Two groups got medicine. One group got the sugar pill, and that was effective. We're actually going to now be doing a trial for acute tinnitus. Someone had asked whether I have any new trials. We are doing an acute tinnitus trial when our device is going to be ready, the external, the non-implantable one. We will have a trial hopefully by mid 2025. And we're hoping if everything goes as planned and perfectly, then maybe by the end of 2025 or early 2026, we'll have our implant ready for trial.
Awesome. That sounds very promising. Okay, Dirk and Hamid's pharmacological approach to treatment does differ quite a bit. Have they any comment on the rationale behind this? Don't wish to start an argument, huh? Okay, Hamid, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. No, I think actually, uh, I mean, we may be using different drugs, but there are some of the drugs that we actually are interested in are the same. My approach has been the migraine approach because it's really what we found in our work is that there's a brain sensitivity is what makes tinnitus loud, and it may be possibly involved in the very very initial onset of the tinnitus, um, and that's why we're doing this sort of the trial. But recently, when Dirk and I were at the Tinnitus Research International meeting, and Dirk was talking about his concepts. I actually agree with most of what he says. I mean, it's just that those are not drugs that I am maybe as familiar with or comfortable with prescribing, so I haven't used those. Um, but I think our general concepts are similar.
Yeah, I agree with Hamid in the sense that our backgrounds is different. Hamid is an ENT specialist, and I'm a neurosurgeon. So I look at more at the brain itself, and so I'm more used to using medications that work on the brain, whereas Hamid focuses more on the drugs that influence migraine from his experience, and more on drugs that might be working in the ENT field. But the philosophy behind it is actually very similar. It's just that we are more used to different products, but the goal is ultimately the same and the philosophy is fairly similar. So I don't think there is no risk that you will create a fight between us. Rather, we can learn from each other actually. But we do believe that looking at other pathologies, whether it's migraine or in my case, it's more neuropathic pain, because I use a fair amount of medications that we're using in neuropathic pain. Um, Ultimately, the philosophy is the same, that we can learn from other pathologies and we can translate what we know from other pathologies to the tinnitus field.
Right. So, okay, no need for an argument. That's good to know. How will young researchers be selected? Is there a strategy in place to ensure the most promising candidates are selected? Yeah, well, this is something we've already noticed is that we're going to have to go out and find the people because there are, because of the lack of funding, etc., not so many young researchers already, trying to build a career in tinnitus. So we're also going to have to entice them to work on that topic. Hamid, how do you think we can do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think and you said exactly what the problem has been is a lack of funding. People, I mean, people may have done even tinnitus research in their training, in their PhD or postdoctoral work, but because there's not as much money, they'll end up going doing other work, like hearing research or neuroscience of other kind. So I think just making people aware that there is a new, funding mechanism for them available. And I think through networking and through talking to other scientists and letting them know that there is now more funding in tinnitus research and that we welcome new ideas and we want sort of fresh looks at tinnitus. And sometimes the best ideas come from people who haven't done much tinnitus research and they have a different background. Like they're in neuroscience, but they've worked on another type of problem. Similar to what Dirk was saying is from a neuropathic pain. You know, a lot of pain related sort of changes in the brain are very similar to actually what happens in tinnitus. And so just coming from different ways, we're open to that. A lot of it is comes from networking and we come to all the tinnitus meetings, but we also go to our other meetings and hearing research and neurosurgery and brain research and neuroscience and psychiatry, etc. And that's how we can try to find new people.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's so important. There might be young neuroscientists, young engineers, young, I don't know, biochemists, whatever out there, um, who can look at this problem from a whole fresh new perspective. Um, will you also be researching pulsatile tinnitus? That's a good one because I think it has, okay, from my limited understanding, it has a very different mechanism. So probably would require very different approaches. And, we kind of also need to focus our efforts, but that's only from my lay perspective. Hamid, since you're an ENT, I feel like you're best placed to answer this.
Sure. So, I think our initial effort is going to be primarily for the what we call the sort of tonal type tinnitus, so the ringing, hissing, the buzzing, humming type sound that's constant. The pulsatile tinnitus is a vascular phenomenon. There was actually another question about pulsatile tinnitus, how it comes and goes. We actually have found that the ones that come and go are actually related to the same what we call atypical migraine process, which makes the brain sensitive and you're listening to internal sounds. But a lot of pulsatile tinnitus is I should say there are a lot of other causes for pulsatile tinnitus. It could be from increase in blood flow. It could be from narrowing of blood vessels going up, narrowing of blood vessels coming down. It could be from increase in pressure inside the head. Um, uh, it could be from bone missing over blood vessels. So it's sort of a very multifactorial issue, and it generally requires a pretty thorough workup with imaging and all that stuff um, before like we attribute it to something like brain sensitivity. But probably as a first stage, we will not be funding pulsatile tinnitus per se, but some of the concepts that we were reworking on with tonal tinnitus will translate to pulsatile tinnitus because, as I mentioned, the brain sensitivity and how the brain pays attention to these signals, whether it's a tonal signal from the brain or whether it's a pulsing sound from the ear and it's being amplified. Because the blood vessels that take the blood up to the brain and come back are run right by your ear. And so I think that the concepts will translate. So the work will eventually help people with pulsatile tinnitus. But a specific project on pulsatile tinnitus will probably not be funding, I suspect, as an initial, uh, probably first couple of years.
Yeah.
As Hamid said, and up to 80% of the patients, we can find a cause and can treat the cause, which is always the best, which is in strike contrast to the non-pulsatile or tinnitus that Tinnitus Quest is predominantly focusing on. So the need, that doesn't mean that pulsatile tinnitus is not severe. It's just that it can be managed with current knowledge a lot better than than non-pulsatile tinnitus, and therefore we should focus on the most difficult to treat pathology, which is the non-pulsatile one.
Okay, I think there was the next question about brain imaging. Yes, can tinnitus be seen in the brain? Do we know exactly where it manifests? I think, Dirk, this is your expertise.
Um, Yes. So can tinnitus be seen in the brain? The simple answer is yes. The problem, however, is that these are so you can see tinnitus with what we call functional imaging. Functional imaging comes in different varieties. You can record electrical activity from the brain, magnetic activity from the brain. You can look at oxygen consumption, like an fMRI or NIRS. You can look at PET scans that looks at metabolic processes in the brain. So there's different ways of looking at the brain. Now, we published a paper a couple of years ago that showed that just based on an EEG, you can have close to 88% accuracy in telling whether there's tinnitus or not. But that's a step at a group level, meaning that on average, if you take a whole group, you can see whether there's tinnitus or not. At an individual level, this is something that is actively researched, and the reason why there is a lot of interest now is because we've got tools that we didn't have a couple of years ago. So ultimately, the signature in the brain is a pattern. It's a pattern or that is recurring and should be there in every tinnitus patient. As you all know, artificial intelligence is ideal in picking up patterns that are too difficult for us humans to see, and there is thus a growing interest in using all these new whether artificial intelligence tools, whether it's machine learning or deep learning or even foundation models to look at these patterns. So as for now, we can say at the group level whether there is tinnitus or not, but as Hamid and I have mentioned before, in the 2-3 year lookout, we do both believe that there will be a more individual picture or signature that can be detected in the brain, and ideally with an easy to use technology. fMRIs are expensive and are difficult to run, make a lot of noise, which is also not ideal for tinnitus patients. Certainly, if they have hyperacusis, EEGs are easy to use, and so that's probably where most interest might be looked at. And so the simple answer is yes, but what we cannot see yet is how loud it is perceived and how distressing it is perceived. We can only detect at the group level whether it's there or not.
A problem with a lot of the earlier imaging studies was also that they didn't correct for hearing loss. So actually, a lot of the changes that they were seeing between the tinnitus and the non-tinnitus group, or differences rather, probably a lot of those were related to hearing loss, because apparently hearing loss also changes your brain quite
Yes.
significantly.
Yes, and this is correct, and not only hearing loss, but also age. So we looked at voxel-based morphometry, which is looking at the structure of the brain, not the function of the brain, but the structure. And when we actually we found some beautiful data, but ultimately what it boiled down to, that they were all age related. And as you all know, with age there is an increased hearing loss. And so these are confounding factors that we have to take into account. But nowadays we, of course, we try to control for hearing loss. But apart from hearing loss, there can also be hyperacusis. And so in some people there might be or associated misophonia or whatever. So yes, up to now we can detect it, but not yet at the individual level. Controlled for hearing loss, controlled for hyperacusis, controlled for age, controlled for sex, because we do the same analysis for pain, and there we see that actually the signature for men and women might be slightly different. So many groups are embarking on finding this signature, and I do assume that this is one of the first reachable steps in helping us to then attack the signature with either electrical stimulation, pharmacological approaches, or other treatment approaches.
Yep. So we need to start wrapping up. We have about 10 minutes left, but we want to cram in as many questions as possible. So let's do our best. Why are veterans organizations not more proactive in advocating that their governments increase funding to find an effective treatment or cure? Yeah, this is a bit baffling, really. I think, Hamid, you've spoken about this a bit before, and I think you have some understanding of how this works in the US, at least. In Europe, might be a different story. What do you think?
Yeah, I think actually the veterans organizations should be doing this. And I think if you know any veterans who suffer from tinnitus, ask them to contact their Congress representative in the United States because um, there is a couple of different systems of funding in the United States. One is, of course, the biggest one, which is comes through the National Institute of Health. But there is a second set of funding that comes through the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration, which is the Veterans Hospital System. Um, and then there's a last one where the Congress itself actually sets aside funding for specific topics of research. So it's called Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. And they actually will have multiple times a year, and they have a set of topics that they want people to submit proposals for, and those are very specific topics. They are, and none of the topics have anything to do with each other. They're like six topics. One may be an abdominal thing, and one may be a brain thing, and whatever. So if you put pressure on your member of Congress, then to include tinnitus in the so-called CDMRP, Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, then they have the power to do that. So yeah, please do that because I think the more funding there is, the more research there will be, and the more progress there will be. I'm in full support of that. Why don't they do it? I don't know. I think it needs to be something that needs to be organized, and sometimes veterans have bigger priorities. Like in the United States, homelessness is a big problem for veterans. There are other issues, but I think it's something that should be done.
I wonder, Jack, if you have any thoughts about this, because, and Jack, by the way, is functioning as our PR manager. So we're now focused, of course, on this group of artists, musicians, and other people in the creative field. Would this be another target group that we can start working on when we have the bandwidth?
Yes, absolutely. When you consider the amounts of problems it is for that particular uh, that particular job and that's a particular industry, yes, of course. I mean, I think I have actually spoken in the past to an ex-English military, and the story that he shared was incredible. He mentioned that he was involved in combat and the obvious sort of situation. And I think that there must be many, many veterans that would like to share this story, actually. Um, so yes, that's definitely something we're looking into. And again, it's the fact that Tinnitus Quest is a platform that they can actually do that is a great thing. So yes, that's another area that we're going to be looking into in 2025.
Because I think there's all these professions, musicians, veterans. There's other professions too, like people work in construction. There's those specific professions that are just at high risk of developing tinnitus, but we just don't really hear that much about it. And like you always say, Jack, like the more people speak about it, the more awareness, the more urgency behind the research, the more donations, the more research we can do, et cetera, et cetera. I think you always explain like the snowball effect very well. So yes, absolutely, we will get in touch with all those patient groups from those different areas. All right. Oh, this is an interesting one. Maybe Jack can also comment on that. Would Tinnitus Quest consider other fundraising avenues like selling merch or supporting people to raise money through sporting events? I think we should consider any way of raising money. And to be honest, we have a lot of exploring yet to do on the possible avenues here. What do you think of this idea, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ideas that I've sort of been thinking about is an event, a Tinnitus Quest event in 2025, perhaps in London or something like that. I mean, this is sort of big sky thinking now. It's much further down the line. But I think that there are many avenues, including merch, that we could explore and that we should explore, actually, because merch would actually not just bring in revenue, but it would also sort of be a form of advertisement for Tinnitus Quest. And it's got the word in, and that will make the word, the buzzword tinnitus. So yes, I think there's many avenues. I particularly like the idea of an event where, like a fundraising event where people can buy tickets and hear speakers, perhaps some of the artists that we've been working with. I think that'd be a very nice thing to do. But yes, in 2025, we'll begin looking at all avenues actually, and trying to think outside of the box and not just going down the usual sort of ideas, trying to really think a little bit differently. And that's another thing about Tinnitus Quest. We're trying to not go down traditional routes and trying to look at different things a little bit differently.
Yes, absolutely, Jack. I think I will also, at the end, I'll say a few more words about our finances because I don't think we've covered that sufficiently, and I think it's actually quite exciting. But we are about to wrap up. I think Hamid has to leave at any moment, so thank you so much for being with us, Hamid, and have a good rest of your day in California. And Marco told me we have 2 final questions lined up, so we'll cover those, and then I'll say a few things about our finances, and then we'll wrap up. So, uh, this is the first time I've learned so much with clarity and depth about my tinnitus. Thank you to the presenters and the questions submitted. Much appreciated. Okay, that's not a question, but it's a very nice sentiment. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you to the Tinnitus Quest team. You give me hope for the future. I pledge to donate at least $50 a month from here on out. Wow, that's really nice. Thank you, Michael. Okay, I think then there were no more questions. Well, there were more questions, but we just don't have time to get to all of them. You're always welcome to reach out to us directly at info@tinnitusquest.com. We'll try to answer your question if we can. If we didn't answer your question here today, we're very sorry about that. Yes, like I said, a few words about finances because there weren't many questions about it, but we really want to be fully transparent about this. So, in terms of fundraising so far, we've raised about $150,000 from big donors, so several big donors who donated significant amounts, and about 13,000 from crowdfunding on the website, which is a good start. But I think with keeping up our communications and social media, we should be able to ramp that up as well. One of the big donors has also pledged, and this is the really exciting part, has pledged to donate €1 million, actually, not dollars. So that's even slightly more in dollars. So that's very exciting. We can't name the person. I think once it actually happens, we will do some publicity around it. We actually have some work to do to make sure that the donation is tax deductible for this person, and that's why it's not happening right now. But as soon as we sort that out, hopefully it will come through. So that's very exciting, and it would put us in a very good position to kick off our grants program next year and fund at least 3, 4, if not more, promising projects. So, yes, on that promising note, we will wrap up. And I want to thank Jack. I want to thank Dirk. I want to thank Hamid, who's still here. Thank you. Sven had to drop off a bit early, but thank you also. But mostly, I want to thank the audience who sat through 2 hours and asked so many thought-provoking questions. I hope it was useful to you. And again, feel free to get in touch at any time. We'd love to hear from you. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day or morning or evening. Bye.